Yeah, so this weekend I was prescribed a 12 by 1 mile at marathon pace by Coach Joe Rubio. So I decided to take that as an opportunity and I broke it up into two workouts and I did the infamous put in flashing lights and fireworks, hand waving in the air, double threshold workout.
Oh no,
But
he said it. He said it.
double threshold, the buzzword, the thing that's been taking over let's run message boards, different training groups, blood lactate testing, took a swing at it just because our coach is not a big believer in it. Just because his theory is, people have run well without doing it forever. Hardly in the grand scheme of things, not that many people do it. So I took an opportunity. I just wanted to see how I feel. I speak about it a lot. I'm super obsessed with studying training. So I decided to give it a go. And the workout I chose was 1 mile, 2 mile, 1 mile, 2 mile, 1 mile in the AM, all at about half marathon pace or right around threshold. I wasn't taking my blood lactate, but I was keeping an eye on my heart rate. So the goal was to be between 88 to 92% of my maximum heart rate, which is right around 168. My math whizzes out there, 168 to 173 was ideally where I wanted to be at. Just kept an eye on it, went purely off of effort. Wound up running about 5 flats on the miles and about like 10:08, 10:04 on the 2 miles. And then in the PM, I
How
came
much
back.
rest?
How much rest? To about 75 seconds, actually. I just jogged around for about 75 seconds in between each
So
rep.
shorter rest. Yep. Yep. Shorter
Yeah,
rest.
shorter rest, definitely. The longer the rest, the faster I could go. But for what I was trying to accomplish, shorter rest and the kind of zone I was trying to hit. And then in the PM, I came back and did 5 by 1 mile on the roads. I went to a track. Turns out they were closed for the holidays. It's a public track back home. Shout out Edgewood High School in West Covina. But went out there. It was closed, but luckily that school I've been running there since I was a kid. That's actually like where my origin start was. My mom would take me to the track there. But turns out the perimeter of the school, if you run the full block on the sidewalk, is exactly 1 mile.
Oh, nice.
So I've used this spot for workouts many times, especially if I get prescribed something like a 6 by 1 mile at like marathon pace or just a straight up steady state run. And I need somewhere uninterrupted, no stoplights, basically no places where a car is going to stop me. Went out there, executed, ran about 4:55 to 5 flat. I started at 5 flat, cut down to like 4:53. So yeah, pretty good. I felt better on the second session than I did on the first session, which was unexpected, but kept it well under control. Same thing, since the whole idea of it was to hit within that threshold and that like half marathon to marathon pace workout with what Joe prescribed. Wanted to keep that consistent with where I am, just because if you are doing this double threshold stuff, you have to periodize it. It's
Yeah.
very similar to what every other program does. The difference is he's just doing more. He's just doing and when I'm saying him, I'm talking about Jakob, which is where everyone pulled it from, Jakob Ingebrigtsen, and the Norwegian style of training. Everybody doesn't really take into consideration that he's still periodizing it around what kind of efforts and what kind of paces he needs to be hitting. So there's a lot of multi-pace training in there.
So you talk about periodization. We're about 4 weeks away from the Terrier. And then we're going into the spring, into March and into April. How does the double threshold at this time of year fit into your periodization?
So for me, I don't anticipate too much of it in my future. Like I said, my coach doesn't necessarily believe in it too much. But one thing that is taken into context, or taken out of context, actually, to put it better, is a lot of this stuff, heavy base training, is not reinventing the wheel. It's just a different design, in the sense of this is just getting 12 miles worth of threshold volume in, versus if you're doing in a single session, you could probably get a maximum of like 10 miles, 9 miles without totally abusing your body. So for me, and looking at training logs of people that have done it successfully, they're not implementing this year round. This is in the base phase when you're in the winter or you're in the fall. And this is creeping a little bit into the spring, maybe that like February, March. But after that, it's just a matter of getting as much. It's like putting money in the bank. You're putting as much money in the bank as possible before you're getting ready to spend. And once you start getting into that like pre-race phase, which is that March, April, you start putting some things on the calendar. You got a poly invite on there, maybe a Brian Clay, a Mount Sac relays. Then you want to back off of that stuff because it shreds your body. after a while, you got to start depositing, or you got to stop depositing, and you got to start cashing in some of those checks with those races. You got to start feeling good. You got to start sharpening up. So for me, I'm probably taking a lot of this stuff out starting February, March. Going to back off of that a little bit and start focusing a little bit more on getting some race specific stuff in.
Yeah, it's a good way to sneak in miles too. Like you said, it's, when you're trying to get it volume in and base training, if you get in, warm up, cool down, strides, recoveries, everything totaled up. How much did you get that day? How many miles did you get that day?
I think I wound up getting like 21
Yeah.
or 22, something like that.
Yep.
I'll look at the Strava for the receipts, but I think it was like right around 21 because I did 2 mile warm up, 2 mile cool down. I jog in between reps. I count that as mileage. Sue me, but
Mhm.
and yeah, right around that 21, 22 range, and it's a lot, but allows you to get that volume up.
Now, how does double threshold training compare to other types of training? Maybe more traditional threshold training, VO2, Lydiard, critical velocity, like all of these things that have come
All the
through, that
buzzwords.
all the buzzwords, right? And maybe
Yeah,
some of the old heads, and I use that term respectfully, right? I use that
yeah.
term with the utmost love and respect. You know, you know what would how does threshold compare, double threshold compare to those other methodologies?
Yeah, so when you look at it, threshold is something that's been around forever. Maybe people haven't explained it correctly, or just the information is more widely available. And even when you look at other teams, so the hot teams right now trending, OAC, they do not do double threshold. They do more traditional workouts, which is more
And
stuff
that's on Athletic Club, right?
on athletic clubs. Yup. It's coached by Dathan Ritzenhein, guys that they have their own podcast, The Coffee Club, Ollie Hoare, Morgan McDonald, Jordy Beamish, like a lot of those guys. They're not doing double thresholds, but they do a lot of the threshold principles. So they do take their blood lactate in between work or in between intervals during workouts. And that's a little more old school. Dathan coaches more like the 80s, 90s coaches, which is what our coach does. We do a lot of identical workouts to them, like a 4x2 mile, a 3x3 mile, hills and twos. A lot of these, well, hills and twos is VO2 max. That's not threshold, but 4x2 mile, 3x3 mile, 2x4 mile. A lot of those more bulky, a lot of volume in a single session. That stuff has been around forever. It's just about refining it, right? And double threshold, what it allows you to do is one, it's primarily built for people at altitude. So that's where you see a lot of those intervals, the 4x2K, the 10x1K, the a lot of these broken up intervals. It's because when you're at 6,000 feet, you don't, or 7,000 feet, you don't recover as well in between.
Is that also because like VO2 workouts are like much more difficult at altitude, so that, threshold and tempo style training is a little bit like more accessible?
Hmm. That's a good question, but I would say probably not, just because it's a way to sneak in more because we have this whole equation 100% of a workout, right?
Right.
So for us, how we define 100% of a workout is the maximum amount of work that you can do in a single workout
Mhm.
without running the risk of injuring yourself. So when you break a workout up, like let's say 12x1 mile, that's more than 100% for me. I would say 100% of a workout at marathon to tempo pace is about 10 miles. But you can sneak in 12 if you break it up into 2 sessions because what you do in between is you hit the volume in the AM session. I got 7 miles worth of volume, but guess what? I get to go home, eat a full meal, go to sleep for an hour or two, recover, come back and do 5 more miles. So 12 is more than 10. And that's kind of a way of justifying doing more. But to recover properly during those interval sessions, you break up those intervals into pieces. And that's also used so that you can test your blood lactate levels.
Okay, I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're doing, it's really like, it's kind of like doing 2 times 80% workouts
Yeah.
in a day. And at altitude, the recovery aspect, I'm just spitballing here, but I'm saying because there's not as much oxygen in the air that you're breathing, so your body isn't flushing out the byproducts of those harder sessions as quickly as it would be at sea level. Is that right?
Yeah, and it's just the intervals in general. Like if you do a 4-mile tempo and you go on the deep end at altitude, like you shot your workout. Like your
Right.
heart rate spikes so high. So to ensure you don't do that, you break it up into pieces. That's why
Yeah.
when we went down our whole threshold kick back in 2018, we were doing like 12 by 1K at like five
Right.
minute pace. We're doing a lot of these workouts really slow, broken up into intervals because that's what we're seeing other coaches do. But in reality, a lot of those methodologies were made for people at altitude, not necessarily for us at sea level.
So it's really like the double T is really evolutionary and not so much revolutionary, right?
Yeah, it's a
Like,
safer way to get more volume.
yeah, it's a safer way to get more volume, and it can be incorporated with VO2 and with hills and other sort of like bread and butter traditional styles of training. You're talking about Dathan. Do they do double T?
No, they do not do double T. They do everything single. So they do workouts similar to us where they're 4 by 2 mile, 2 by 4 mile, 3 by 3 mile, stuff like that.
Okay, and they might just double back with a 6 mile evening run or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
All their stuff is on Strava. So if anyone like ever gets interested, a lot of
yeah,
those guys like Klecker, Morgan McDonald, they're
yeah,
really open about what they do. They talk about
and,
it too. They
and
they
that makes
post it
that
all.
and that makes sense. Like Dathan was an 11th or 12th grade when I was in high school, like when I was a freshman. And I think he's a what, like Rockford, Michigan kind of guy. So like Midwest,
Yeah.
like, kind of going to Colorado. I can see a lot of those like traditional like philosophies from the 80s and 90s, like you talked about. But it's like that stuff works. And
Yeah.
I think you know double threshold can fit into those equations when done properly, right?
Yeah, like Mike
Uh,
Smith, from what I've seen his guys do, they don't necessarily replicate the exact Norwegian model of like,
right.
6 by 6 minutes or like 20 by 400. They don't necessarily copy and paste. A lot of the Mike Smith workouts too are he only uses it to hit that like half marathon pace. And since they're in NAU, like 65, whatever they're at, 65 or 7,000, they're just using it for that 445 to 5 to 450 pace for their 13 flat guys. So it's not necessarily that he's doing every single workout and copy and pasting exactly what the Norwegian model is.
Right. And he what do they call it? They call it sub
They call it
T?
no, sub T for them is marathon pace. They just call
Oh,
it T.
they just call
Just
it T. Okay.
just
T sub
T.
T.
So
Got it. Got
double
it. And
T.
people
Yeah.
and their terminology here gets a little confusing. I mean, you could probably
Yeah.
do a whole episode on the terminology, like as you say, tempo, threshold, cruise. You have all these terms. Like I a
Yeah.
lot of times I will call it like, you know, 5 times 2 mile at tempo pace. And I'll just kind of use
Yeah.
that sort of casually. And I think tempo gets thrown around a lot too, but I think threshold is more of like is more clearly defined lactate level, like you said. Who should do double T and who should not do double
I would
threshold?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say people and it kind of depends what people respond well to, right? And what people's ability to handle load is. So what people's ability to handle like heavy mileage. So someone who
Higher
is
mileage?
yeah, like higher mileage guys who historically have stronger aerobic engines. You want to keep feeding the beast. But then you have guys that are, a little bit more on the speedy side, a little more of that sprinter type of runner or like a in the lower events like the 800 and the 15. A lot of those guys might not benefit from high mileage because they have all those fast twitch or like they might not benefit as much. So a lot of it I've
On that
seen,
topic, on that, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but
yeah,
the I was reading up on this, and that's actually one of the things that um the Norwegians came up with as well is if you have more of a middle distance profile 815,
yeah.
that's actually not a good that's not a good event group for this style of training.
Yeah, I mean, I believe it. I mean, being out here in slow, there's the slow TC or the Van Noy boys, whatever you want to call them. They all run pretty identical times. Craig's run 144, Baylor's run 145, John's run 145. But you look at their training, it's all different. John trains like a sprinter. Baylor trains like right in between, and Craig trains more like a long distance runner in the
Right.
sense of what their long runs look like, the length of their tempos, what they can run in an open two. A lot of them, they run very similar times, but when it comes down to the actual execution of practice, it'll be like on Monday, Craig has 6 in the morning, 4 in the PM, and then you see John run 4. But that's just like an example of stuff that they do.
Right.
And their mileage is wildly different. Their training is wildly different. But a lot of times those guys will you can't necessarily apply like copy and paste the same program for those guys. So shout out to
Right.
Van Wyck for getting those guys right.
No, that is that I do appreciate that, how, it is, everything is intentional. We're seeing kids in high school do double T. What are your thoughts on
Yeah.
that?
Oh man. I mean, it's hard to tell because you look at where it started with a guy like Jakob, and he started it since he was a kid and has seen wild success. But I think for kind of like the Western culture, for a lack of a better term, I think you have to let those kids be kids because they're not running out of desperation the way like the Ingebrigtsen family is. Like it was gold medal or bust. I
Mhm.
think a lot of these kids just don't like it enough. Or the issue with that too is if you do that in high school, they start
Right.
worshiping their coach as like, you know, the godsend, like this guy's the second coming of Christ. And what that can really do is just because of the way that the system is set up, you're going to go from high school to NCAA. Now
Right.
you have kids going from doing double threshold in high school to a coach that maybe doesn't believe it in NCAA. And guess what? They're not going to buy in. And that almost becomes like the bane of that college coach's existence because now it's like, well, what are you going to do? This kid doesn't trust you at all. He's doesn't think this program works. He's not bought in. And a lot of times it's probably never really executed correctly. Like, could you do a tempo right in high school? I couldn't. My coach told
No.
me to do a 3 mile tempo and I PR'd in my 3 mile.
Yeah. No, we did tempo mile repeats, like, on the track.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
crew monitored, yelled
Yeah.
at if you went too fast.
Yeah, I mean, when I was coaching high school, we would do miles, we do thousands, we would do 800 meters, short rest, short recovery.
Yeah.
Um, I think, I think you said something there, desperation. When Ingebrigtsens were trying to make teams, it was trying to, gold medal, or bust. And I think you got to pump the brakes a little bit sometimes in high school. Like
Yeah.
I think to a certain extent, I think maybe double threshold would work, like
Yeah.
scientifically. But like you said, when you're talking about if you still continued with double threshold in March and April, you're not going to be feeling fast, right? You're not going to be
Yeah.
feeling good.
You get flat.
Um, you get flat. So, they're experiencing that at 16, 17, 18 years old, right? When they should be feeling good
Yeah.
and excited to go to the next level, right? You could get to the next
Yeah.
level and feel flat. So I think it's one of the things of like, yes, technically you could do it, but should you,
Yeah. I just
Um,
don't think a lot of kids in high school, like again, it took a special breed of athlete to do it. A kid that said he's going to be the best in the world when he was 10. Like,
right.
I just don't think a lot of kids are disciplined enough to train the right way to do it. Like not run too hard. I mean,
And
even
also,
people
yeah.
our age can't do that.
And also like, are we doing the other 21 hours a day? Are
Yeah.
they, eating well, sleeping well, hydrating, napping, you know, all that stuff, all that support, all those little, ancillary activities are very important, I think, to this style of training that is, like you said, let kids be kids. If they want to go to homecoming, or if they have prom or if they have something like that, like that is, that's important to them too. So it is, you know, I think it's definitely something that is probably best for, college and above.
Yeah, someone who could actually be dedicated to it. Someone who can consciously make the decision like, I'm gonna be all in on this.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that is, I mean, we could
We
talk
can
for
go for
days on
days on
we can go
that.
for days on that. But yeah, I'm glad to, your was that your first attempt at double threshold?
Yeah, that was. I just wanted to
Yeah.
see how it felt because,
Yeah.
you put a lot of research into it. It's been the buzz. Guys like the whole Mike Smith team had a lot of US champions this year. They won the 5 to 10, the women's 15.
Mhm.
And they also NAU is one of the top premier programs. What did they go like 5 out of the last 6, something like
Yep.
that, and won
Something like
national
that.
titles. You look at guys like Hobbs Kessler, who is the phenom from high school from Michigan that went pro. He just started incorporating it, dropped his 15 from 334 to 332. So
Wow.
you got, yeah, and he's
And
20
he's
years
a
old.
he's a he's a pure miler, right?
Yeah, I mean, he also has a 145 800,
But
but
he's not like a Jakob.
no, pure miler. Yeah,
He's like
middle
a
distance
pure
guy.
he's a pure miler doing the double threshy. So, I
Yeah,
mean,
little brick.
yeah.